Okay, let's just dive right into this. We're looking at a very specific moment in time when the entire music industry was turned completely on its head. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a trip back to the emphatically sweltering summer of 1993. This was the exact year when the Lollapalooza tour stopped being just a concert and literally became the chaotic tipping point for modern music. And it brings up a really fascinating question, right? What happens when the underground suddenly becomes the mainstream? To put it into perspective, just think about your absolute favorite super obscure indie artist today suddenly blowing up everywhere on platforms like TikTok. Throughout this explainer, we're going to explore that incredible raw tension between a totally authentic fringe culture that really just wanted to make noise and the massive corporate establishment that was suddenly paying very, very close attention.
Section 1. The Ultimate Alternative Festival.
So, Lollapalooza actually started back in 1991, and it was originally just supposed to be a farewell tour for the band Jane's Addiction. But by the summer of '93, it had completely evolved past its sophomore slump. It had successfully tapped into this massive, booming, alternative nation zeitgeist. The organizers essentially created a home for bands that were, frankly, considered way too weird for MTV at the time. They swapped out the classic rock dinosaurs that usually dominated those big summer tours with pure, unadulterated underground energy. And in doing so, they proved that a traveling carnival of absolute misfits could totally dominate the pre-millennium economy.
And man, what an atmosphere it was. A circus with a scent of evil. That's actually how a comic book series tied to the tour perfectly described the vibe. Just imagine it. You've got this sweltering heat radiating right off the cracked asphalt of old stadium lots, thick clouds of dust kicking up everywhere, and the totally chaotic, untamed energy of thousands of kids moshing. It wasn't just a show you watched, you lived it. You sweated through it. Fans literally felt like they were physically inside the music.
Section 2. When weird became normal. Which brings us to a really fascinating paradox. 1993 was the exact moment when these totally left-of-center artists were finally handed the microphone by the mainstream media. I mean, just listen to the sheer diversity of this lineup. It brilliantly illustrates how wildly different these acts were. You've got the funk metal of Primus playing right next to the heavy prog metal of Tool. The defining grunge sounds of Alice in Chains sharing a bill with the aggressive electronic beats of Belgium's Front 242. And the activist hip-hop of Philadelphia's The Goats. It was this complete, glorious collision of genres that had previously lived in total isolation from one another. And even the artists themselves felt the sheer surrealness of this whole setup. As Primus guitarist Larry Lalonde put it, it was just a crazy atmosphere. It was really like a traveling circus. Think about the stark contrast here for a second. You have the absolute, unapologetic weirdness of these fringe bands, suddenly broadcasting their noise to massive crowds of over 20,000 people every single day. But you want to know the wildest part? A band as incredibly strange as Primus was the actual headliner for the festival. Just listen to this description of their sound. Machine gun bursts of bass and warped nursery rhymes. Frontman Les Claypool played a bass that sounded like everything from a creaking wooden boat to a didgeridoo, and he delivered his lyrics like a highly congested carnival barker. The fact that this was the sound closing out massive stadium lots every single night, that proved just how incredibly normal weird had actually become.
Section 3. Naked Protests and Activism.
But, it wasn't just about the music. It was very much about the message. And that brings us to a legendary, sweltering tour stop on July 18th in Philadelphia. Now, to understand what happened here, we need to quickly define the PMRC, or the Parents Music Resource Center. They were a group that actively lobbied for those black and white parental advisory stickers to be placed on records that contained explicit lyrics. The rap metal band Rage Against the Machine viewed this as censorship and government micromanagement, and they decided to use their massive new platform to make a very, very loud statement.
And this protest perfectly captures the raw, unpredictable danger of this tour. Okay, so picture this. At minute 0, all 4 members of Rage Against the Machine walk out on stage completely naked with the letters PRMC scrawled across their chests and duct tape over their mouths. 2 minutes in, instead of playing a single note, they simply set their instruments against the amplifiers to generate this massive, deafening drone of feedback. 5 minutes go by. They are just standing there in complete silence while the crowd initially cheers, totally eating up the spectacle. But by the 10-minute mark, yeah, those cheers turn into bottle throwing. The crowd finally realized the band wasn't going to play at all. Ultimately, the guys were literally hauled off the stage by the police.
Bassist Tim Comerford later reflected on the sheer chaos of that day, saying, "After 10 minutes of standing there naked, what started as cheers turned into bottle throwing. People were just bummed out." This brilliantly illustrates a key dynamic of this whole era. The underground movement could be incredibly confronting and deeply uncomfortable, even for its own hardcore fans. I mean, these guys were entirely willing to sacrifice a massive career-building gig just to make a point.
Section 4. Beyond the guitars.
The festival was also actively pushing musical boundaries in a big way. On one side, sure, you had your traditional rock setup, standard guitars, acoustic drum kits, the usual. But on the other side, you had groups like the Belgian outfit Front 242. They brought aggressive European electronic music straight to the daytime stage. They essentially lugged a portable studio on the road with them, using a literal PowerBook computer, synthesizers, and samples to create these heavy, driving dance beats. For an audience completely expecting flannel shirts and distortion pedals, seeing a band trigger electronic sequences in the blazing afternoon sun was a massive, challenging shift.
And speaking of challenging the audience, these artists brought a highly confrontational personality to the media, too. Take this legendary, absolutely defiant quote from Tool's frontman Maynard James Keenan during an MTV interview on the tour. He looked right at them and said, "I'm not the lead singer. I am the singer. I'm not Diana Ross, and this isn't the fucking Supremes." He was fiercely defining his artistic boundaries, flat out refusing to be boxed into traditional rock star tropes, even as Tool was riding incredibly high on the success of their debut album.
Then, of course, you had these moments of pure, defining visual iconography, like the legendary Staley squat. Just picture Alice in Chains frontman Lane Staley out there in the emphatically hot weather, delivering these intense, completely sweat-drenched performances, entirely hunched over the microphone stand. That visceral, physical, exhausted stance, it literally became the visual definition of the entire grunge era. It was raw, it was unpolished, and it was entirely authentic.
Section 5. The end of an era.
But, nothing this volatile stays pure forever. 1993 was widely considered the year Lollapalooza maintained its true artistic purity and its strict focus on the music, successfully holding off the general ickiness of corporate sponsorship. But then, 1994 hits. That was the commercial peak, stacked with massive names like the Smashing Pumpkins and the Beastie Boys. And by 1996, the festival books Metallica as the headliner, and that signaled a massive, fatal shift away from its alternative roots. The whole underground dream was fraying, leading to a rapid descent into corporate branding and overt commercialization. 1993 was truly the last bastion before the rebellion simply became the establishment.
Which leaves us with a really profound paradox to think about today. When the alternative becomes the center of culture, does it stop being alternative? By succeeding so wildly, Lollapalooza '93 actually laid the groundwork for the death of its own underground purity. The outsiders completely won the war, but in doing so, they became the empire. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you wanting to dig even deeper into this incredibly wild era of music history.